But all right, so let's get started. I mean, it's 5:30. We had some good questions that came in from some folks. One of the questions, and let's see. Okay, good. We got some folks in here. Panelists. It says I have 3 panelists, but I only see 2 of us. In chat, yes, we have chat. We are spending it with you. Yay! I'm glad to hear you're spending St. Patty's. St. Patty's Day with me. Might as well throw a little bit of the Irish at you. So happy to have you on here. If you have questions or if you want to add anything, you can always go in and put in a somebody's connecting audio. Hey, we got somebody joining us on the panel. Sweet. I heard Nicole yelling from the other office. I am not joining you. Well, it looks like you are. I'm going to pin your video and spotlight it, and we'll make you the host. All right, so this is the first time that we're going to be doing this, but we are going to be doing this moving forward. One of the things that I can tell you is I have a friend of mine that's an advisor in Houston, and they do this every 2 weeks, and they've actually built up quite a following, and it's given them a lot of content that they can reuse. So one of the things that I think about is we get, sometimes we get the same question over and over again. And once we start to get a question 2 or 3 times, we'll do a white paper or I'll do a letter, and monthly we send out a letter to all of our clients. So before the election, as an example, I had a lot of people asking, what was the main question they were asking? Nathan.
Who's going to win? What the market's going to do?
Yeah, what's going to happen if Biden wins? What's going to happen if Trump wins? And what's going on? So we did a little research on that. We shared that. I've covered that a lot. But some of the things, we're kind of opening this up for any questions. And Nathan and I will have conversations about things going on in the markets. We have conversations about lots of different things. And I said, we've also had conversations with accountants and attorneys. And I said, this might just be a neat forum to kind of share some information. So some of the questions we got tonight are, what actions can we take to fight new high inflation? Do you think inflation is going to be a factor as we move forward? I also had a question in regards to unemployment fraud. We also had a question about, help us understand GameStop and what happened with that trading frenzy and how does it affect our retirement accounts? Another question we got is, what should I be telling my grandchild or my child who's going for their first job? And what would you, if you were to do it over again, what are some of the things you would have done and some of the things you would have thought about? So if we have time, we'll get through all these. We did have a couple other questions that come in. If you've got questions in the chat feature or in the Q&A, and I see I have a highlight here in the Q&A, which just says hello. So hello right back at you.
I answered the other question.
Oh, did you? You answered another one? This is
Yeah.
the green beard. All right. So you can use the Q&A section or the chat section to ask additional questions, and we can kind of go from there. But let's start with inflation. So what are some of the things that we think about when we're looking at inflation, and is inflation going to be a concern for us as we're going forward? So we were talking about this. We've been talking about this a lot. Last year, what was the stimulus? We printed new money and put it into the system. The government wrote, they got out their pencil and they started writing some checks. My pencil's gone. Oh, here it is. Here's my government pencil. They got out their pencil and they started writing checks. They wrote checks to the tune of $4 trillion with the T dollars, $4 trillion bucks worth of money that they put into the economy. But you'll notice that the price of goods and services didn't go up. So think in terms of if there's one person, they go to buy a painting, here's the price of the painting. But if you have 10 people that are trying to buy the same painting, what happens to the price of the painting? It starts to go up. That's supply and demand. Well, we put $4 trillion into the economy. So now we have more money in the economy, but the same number of goods and services. So what will eventually happen to those goods and services? They will start to go up. What is that called?
Inflation.
But you're the only guy that can answer. It's almost not fair. You're going to take the brunt of this the entire night. I mean, you're just going to take this kind of heat. Inflation. It's called inflation. So, what's the best hedge against inflation, Nathan?
I would say the stock market,
Why?
because inflation is the cost of goods going up. So your new iPhone is going up, a gallon of milk at Kroger is going up, gallon of gas at the Shell station is going up. So how do we get our portion of those higher prices? That is by investing in the companies that are selling those goods and services at higher prices.
Yeah. So, if the goods and services is going up, then the companies are making more money. So, if you have stocks, you're actually participating in the additional revenue. So, historically, the best hedge against inflation has been the stock market. But what do we see for inflation going forward? So that's the biggest question, which is where do you think inflation is going to go as we move forward? The Fed actually, you were telling me the Fed met today. I was in meetings. You were doing research and working on another account, but I did see where I saw something that said the Fed's keeping rates low till 2023. Did you?
Yeah. So they survey at these meetings. They survey the different Fed presidents. There's different Fed banks throughout the country, and so they take a survey. When do you anticipate interest rates going up? And kind of the consensus is 2023 is when they anticipate interest rates rising. So that's still 2 years away.
Well, one of the things we've been telling folks for a good while is we don't see inflation going up through 2021. We don't see the Fed raising interest rates, which will help to increase inflation, at least for a couple years. So think in terms of the economy starting to get back on track. We're looking at GDP. They estimated GDP at like 6.5. They thought it would be
for 2021, 6.5.
They're thinking GDP. So we've been based on our research, which we use a lot of different companies for research, but we were talking about this. I've been predicting based upon the research we have that it'll be between 3.5 and 5.5. So for the Fed to come back and say, hey, we think GDP will be somewhere around 6.5, that's actually good news for us because it's a bit more than what we were thinking. But our frame of thought on this is pretty simple. Hey, people are sitting on the sidelines. They're not working. Businesses were forced to shut down. The government threw $4 trillion and they wrote checks to people. Savings accounts have grown during this time. I think it was up to something in the trillions of dollars. It's sitting in savings accounts. Well, people that are of a younger generation. You think about the folks that were part of the Great Depression, or maybe your parents were a part of the Great Depression. They were taught to save. Generation X, Generation Y, millennials is, hey, I'll charge it, I'll pay for it later. It's the I want it now generation. Give it to me now. I'll worry about paying for it later. And when I'm 90 and I'm still holding down a full-time job because I've still got debt, that seems to be the norm. So one of the things that we're thinking about is, okay, GDP is going up. More and more people are going to be going back to work, but also they've got cabin fever. They're going to want to get back out. I know I do. I want to go to the movie theater. I want to watch a movie on the big screen instead of on my TV. So that was our once about every 2 months we would go to the movie theater and we'd see a movie. Well, that's putting money into the economy. That's spending money on the movie. We would go out to dinner. Then we would maybe go out and we'd get popcorn, drinks, all that stuff. So, it's $150, $200 a night with the family that we didn't do it all last year.
Yeah, you haven't done it here.
Yeah, so we see that people are going to be putting more money into the economy. Now, that's going to help with getting tax revenues and things along those lines, which we don't even want to start down that path with me. But one of the things that the Fed has said is we're going to go ahead and hold interest rates down for a while. Now, you were talking about this. They do surveys of the people that are on that board for the Fed. And there are a couple people that are starting to lean towards, well, maybe we'll raise them in 2022.
Right, right. So there is a little bit of momentum going in that direction that, we foresee rates starting to rise in 2022. Now, if you look at it as a poll, 2023 wins, but there are a couple more that are leaning towards rates will go up in 2022. So that's definitely something that we'll keep our eye on as we continue to see these surveys come out, is when do they anticipate rates going up? And we'll see if that trend continues.
Yeah, but it seems to be a pretty unanimous consensus that through 2021 they're not raising interest rates.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Which
sure.
is good news. They're basically saying we want it to get red hot. We're trying to make up for what happened last year is kind of the consensus. So one of the question back to the question, what actions can you take to fight against inflation? Well, inflation is just one of many concerns, but the best hedge against inflation is having money in the stock market.
Mhm.
So, which is kind of, for some folks, it's a little bit scary. I don't want to have more money in the stock market. I want to have less money in the stock market because I don't want to ride that roller coaster. Our volatility hedge funds, we've got kind of like I always say we've got a nice set of shocks on our portfolio. It's like a Jeep. The Jeep's fine on the highway, but when you turn into the desert and you start going across that rough ground,
Yeah.
our Jeep that's our moderate has a pretty good suspension system. However, for some of our folks that are a little bit more risk tolerant, we are increasing their stock holdings, mainly because stocks are the number one hedge against inflation.
Right.
So you think about inflation historically over a 30-year span was about 2.1%. So that's going back to say 1980. So 1990. So if you go past from 1990 on, it was 2.1%. What I think a lot of people are worried about is that hyperinflation that we had back in the 70s. You actually were talking about an article that you read about that, because I've argued that the Federal Reserve didn't really know what they were doing at that time, and that's why they had that. It was
Right.
with the Alan Greenspan when he was in charge back when we had the tech bubble and those kind of things, and it looked like it was going to go hyperinflation, but he made some maneuvers that kept it from happening.
Right.
So I can't remember. You read more than I do. You read that
Yeah.
article.
There, whenever there's a fear of inflation, the fear is always, the people who remember this time automatically have these flashbacks back to the late 70s, early 80s, where, I remember my first mortgage was 14.5%, was 16%. So, that seems to be where people's first thought goes.
Also the gas line, wasn't there, you got to go to the gas station an hour, sit in line for an hour to get gas.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. So I've been told.
I actually remember those times, but yeah, you will have to.
So that's always the fear. Are we going back to those type of inflation numbers? And so we of course we read a lot. And I guess the argument that we're seeing is no, we're not going back to late 70s, early 80s, where your CD paid 14% and your mortgage was 16.5%. The argument that I've seen, and it makes sense to me, is that no, we're going to go back more towards late 80s, maybe early 90s inflation. Now, a lot of you might not even remember that. That might have maybe just been a blip on the radar that you've completely forgot about. But inflation did increase back then due to a number of factors, some of them being, gas prices, oil prices. You'll remember the Persian Gulf War back in, I don't know, what was that, 1990, 1991. But there were several factors there that led to inflation of 5%, 5.5%, which is higher than average. But they're thinking, from the research that we've looked at, that maybe that's what is more in the cards, as opposed to that extreme inflation in the late 70s, early 80s. Now, are we anywhere close to that right now?
No, and in order to get there, I subscribe to the fact that they learn from their mistakes.
Yeah.
So when you think about who was Bernanke that came in, he was a student at Greenspan. So was Yellen. They came in and said, "Look, the Federal Reserve has a tremendous amount of power."
Mhm.
And I often will say, think about what controls the stock market. What are the things that can have an effect on the stock market? And I always kind of picture it like gravitational pull. What has the strongest gravitational pull? Well, that's the sun. What's the second? Well, call that the earth. What's the third? Well, that would be the moon. So when you think about changes on the moon can have an effect on the US economy. Changes in the gravity of the earth could have an effect, but changes with the sun would have a huge effect. So what are the equivalents inside of markets? So the sun to the markets is the United States Federal Reserve. So the US economy would be the next one, which is would be the earth. The third would be foreign countries. So I'll use this as an example. Some of you will remember Greece goes bankrupt. Stock market drops 700 points in a day. Comes back up. Okay, that was a 700 point swing in a day. That was a big deal. COVID shuts down the United States economy. Markets drop 43%. The Fed announces stimulus. Market recovers within three months.
Yeah.
The Fed announced in October of 18 that they were thinking of increasing interest rates by 0.25. The market dropped 23%. They came back in December and said, we might have jumped the gun. We changed our mind. Boom, markets recovered in the month of January. I mean, the Fed has the biggest control in what's going on in the market. They've said, we want to raise interest rates, but we don't want to do it in a way that creates hyperinflation. So they're going to be raising it, not for 2021, but we think in 2022, we might see 0.25% or 0.5% for the year. That's not saying, hey, we're going to go from 2 to 10. That would be devastating.
Mhm.
So the key is we just got to keep an eye on that kind of stuff. Somebody asked, what about property? What about property when it comes to inflation? Property right now, if you think about where the interest rates are at right now, you can do a 20-year loan in 2.75 or 2.875. You can do a 30-year loan fixed at 3%. Right now, it is a seller's market for sure. We've got some neat stories. So we had a client that decided they were going to sell their house. I don't know if they're even on this call or not, or on this webinar, but they decided they were going to sell their house. They put it up for sale on Friday. And on Monday, they had 7 offers, 4 above asking price. They chose the one that was $30,000 more than what they listed it for. That's moving property quickly. There's a lot of buyers out there because there's cheap money in the markets. I mean, interest rates at those kind of rates is just ridiculous. Here's one even better. We were doing a legal doc meeting with Matt Johnson. You remember when he told us about this?
Yeah.
The realtor was they hired a realtor. The realtor came out to the house to take pictures.
Yeah.
Someone pulled over and said, are you putting this house up for sale? The realtor said, yeah, I'm taking pictures. They're going to be selling it. They said, what's the asking price? They said $270,000. They walked into the house and offered the owner $300,000, and they sold it that day.
Crazy.
Now that's crazy. That's crazy. We're in unique times with that. But inflation, as far as houses go, the cost of everything goes up, including houses. Can we see housing bubbles like we had in the past? It's possible, but they're going to be more pocketed because we don't have. That's a whole different. They did a movie about that. You can watch that called The Big Short. Is that what it was? Big Short.
Big Short.
Big Short. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good book too.
Good book.
Yeah.
You like to read. I don't like to
Well,
read as
I've read the,
much. I
I've
like
seen the movie.
books on tape. That's me. Audible. I can listen to them in the car. And I just read Business Brilliant, which is really good, which kind of leads into one of the questions we had about grandkids getting a job. If we can get to that, I hope we can. So that's our take on inflation. We think a little bit more equity helps against inflation, but we don't think inflation is really going to be a factor for us until probably 2023, 2024. And we've got a whole nother election that's going to happen prior to that. Kind of your thought as well?
Yeah, I
Plays in
concur.
line.
Feel like a newscaster here with my papers on my desk. And it's like they take them and just do that. Just seems like what you're supposed to do.
Is commodities. So I got a question that came in that's still on inflation. Is commodities such as gold and silver equitable in an inflation situation? How would you answer that?
To me, it seems like the major driver in gold prices is not necessarily inflation. It's more fear. Fear of the stock market crashing, fear of whatever. There's lots
Well,
of
look,
things.
you could make an argument that, hey, if you've got inflation or stock prices are overvalued, gold would be the inflation hedge to play. I don't know. I'm going to play devil's advocate and have a little fun with you here. I know how I would answer this. I'm just curious how you will. Gold
Yeah.
for inflation. There's several problems with gold. First is you don't go down to the grocery store and hand them a brick of gold. That's your first issue. So we get questions about gold all the time. The biggest proponents to you buying gold is somebody who's selling it. Those are the biggest people that are pushing gold. Gold will rise over time, same as any asset class goes up. Will it keep pace with stocks? Historically, it hasn't. And typically when gold goes up is when people think, oh, the US dollar is going to be worthless at some point, and the US economy is coming to an end, and the financial markets are going to collapse, and that's why you should hold gold. I would argue that you really don't need gold in that situation. You should buy lead in the form of bullets, because if the US financial markets crash, you've got bigger problems than trying to take a gold bar down to the grocery store. That's the collapse of the world. I don't see that happening, but there are some zombie apocalypse movies out there that might show such things.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to the next question. I want to make sure we got time to get through all of them. What do I need to know about unemployment fraud? So this is interesting. I pulled some research on this because last year there was about $550 billion went to support people who are out of work in 2020. On average, there's about 32 billion a year that's spent. So we went from 32 billion to 550. Go figure when the government says, hey, close down all your businesses, stop work. We're just going to shut the entire economy down. Well, here's part of the problem. Anytime that there are things that will drive fear, that are things that'll make big moves, you've got people out there who are going to be bad actors that are going to try to take advantage of the situation. So in this report that I read back from March 15th, was Friday when I was doing a little research on this, the Labor Department Inspector General's office estimates more than 63 billion has been paid out improperly through fraud or errors since March of 2020. Think about that, 63 billion. That's over 10% of what was paid out is actually being paid out to people that aren't actually filing. So what are some of the things that are happening? Well, people are filing for people who were dead. People are filing for folks who are living that just didn't file. And then how do people find out about it? Well, they start to get a call or they get a piece of mail from Job and Family Service. They go, wait a minute, I didn't actually sign. There's even people that have not signed up for unemployment that are getting the debit cards. There was a story, you were talking about a story, a lady had a stack of them or something, and she keeps calling, but they haven't fixed it. So every month she gets a debit card.
Yeah.
Where'd you read that at?
Uh, I don't remember offhand, but
I mean, it doesn't surprise me.
yeah,
One of the things that I was reading about on this is there are three major credit reporting agencies. You got Equifax, you've got Experian, and then you've got TransUnion. It was either Equifax or Experian that was hacked, right? That was a couple years back. They got hacked.
Yeah, Experian.
One of your
Yeah.
three major credit unions or credit agencies was hacked. People often will say, well, how's your cybersecurity or whatever? And I'll say, well, we have all the industry standards. We've got the best that we can have. But Experian was hacked. Target was hacked. I believe Anthem was hacked. Bank of America was hacked. And then the US Social Security system was hacked. So if they want your information, somebody's got it already, because odds are you've done business with one of those five agencies. And if you've ever paid into Social Security, then the potential is you were hacked on that. But what's been happening is people are getting, they're getting benefits. The biggest problem with this is that the state government, state is who runs your job and family services, who runs that unemployment office. The issues that they had back in 2008 when people went out of work, they had a lot of issues with claims on unemployment because their software was outdated. But here's what we're finding out. They haven't upgraded since 2008. So that software that was outdated then, we just put 30 some million people out of work. And now we're trying to put even more pressure on a system that's over a decade, 2 decades old in some cases, as far as technology goes. I know we got people on the call right now that are in the technology field that work for IBM. They will tell you probably within 6 months to a year, the technology is outdated. So here we have our state governments using technology that's 20 years old. And oh, oops, we can't keep track. We're sending checks out to dead people. Go figure. Also, there was a story about part of something is people are selling. We were talking about home sales. I think I told you about this the other day. People are selling their houses. There are people that'll see a for sale sign go up in a yard, and they would file an unemployment claim for the people that lived in that house. And then when the mail is sent to that house to the mailbox, they're just picking the mail up because nobody's living there. The house is for sale.
Wow.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So what happens if that happens to you, I guess, is one of the main questions. Number one, you got to contact Job and Family Services, which is not going to be an easy task in itself, because their phone lines, you might be on hold for a couple hours to get into them. I use something called LifeLock. There are other different agencies that you can use. I do that to prevent identity theft. I have it on myself. Just because I've had a couple clients that have had their identity stolen. It's just kind of a huge pain in the butt to go through. So I have that. It gives me, if anybody's running a credit report, it gives me information if any type of account. So that's something. But if it happens to you, which they're finding that it's happening in multiple states even. So one person's filing in 4 or 5 different states, and it's not even the person, which is kind of neat. But number one, you start by calling your police department and letting them know that your identity was stolen. That's your first step. Second step is going to be reach out to Job and Family Services. The next step after that is contact whoever your previous employer was or whoever your current employer is, because odds are they've gotten a call from Job and Family Services or some kind of letter. We actually had that here. I got a letter that somebody was claiming unemployment that I didn't know who they were, and they never worked for me. So I had to call a number and say, look, that person's never worked here. I don't know who this is.
Wow.
And they said, oh, thank you very much. Appreciate that. But you might want to reach out to a former employer too, if that happens to you. Some of the other things that are just kind of good practice is we call it keep up your good personal digital hygiene. One is update passwords on your stuff, make them unique. I actually have a list where I keep track of all my passwords, but there are things called two-factor authentication. You want to use those when possible. Makes it kind of a pain in the butt if you forget your password, but that's kind of the point. You want it to be a pain to be able to get a password reset. If you haven't filed taxes, file your taxes. The
form
that shows up is going to be what form is that, Nathan?
It's the 1099-C, I believe.
1099-G.
Yeah, for unemployment benefits.
For unemployment benefits. So if the state sends you out a 1099-G after you reported the fraud, then you're going to want to touch base with the IRS, and the IRS themselves also have tips for victims of unemployment fraud. You can also, victims also get an IRS identification PIN number, I guess. It's a 6-digit number that helps prevent thieves from filing federal tax returns in the name of the victims. So those are a couple steps. Another thing I want to think about, we've been having this happen a bunch. PayPal. My wife said, "Oh, I got this notice from PayPal that there was something charged to our account." And she's like, "Do I click on this?" And I looked at it. In the title, it's actually not PayPal. It looks like PayPal sending you a notification. It's a scare tactic to get you to click, and then they want you to enter in your bank information. No, no way, Jose. If you want to talk to PayPal about your information, go to their website, log in through it, update it that way. Don't ever click on something that comes into you. Another good one is Apple. I've been getting stuff from Apple. Hey, we think log into your account, put in your information. So I clicked on one, took me to a site. I'm looking at the line that shows you the web address. It was not Apple. It was Habib's car shop in, Papua New Guinea or something. I was like, nope, click out of that. I log into Apple directly and I had no issues. I've even called. I got something from Chase once that said, "Hey, your account, we need to verify your account something." I called Chase. They're like, "No, we didn't send you anything." Phone call from the IRS. "We just need to verify your social security number and address and date of birth." Let me tell you, the IRS will not call you. So anybody that calls, "Hey, there's a lawsuit pending. If you don't call back this number, then you could be sued." No. If you have questions about any of our clients, call us. I would be happy to make the phone call for you. I actually did that. Tim Sullivan, one of our CPAs, got a call from the IRS. Said, "You've got some issues you need to call." Tim called the number and Tim said, "I've been a CPA for 40 years. I'm just not real sure on click." So those are all things that to be aware of. All right, GameStop. Help me understand GameStop trading frenzy, and how does this affect retirement accounts? How will this affect things in the market, and so forth and so on. So for those of you who are on here that don't know, GameStop is a company where they sell video games, right? It's a brick and mortar where they sell video games. You can correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, Nathan, but so GameStop, which was, this happened back in, I can't even remember when this happened. February, maybe?
Well, it's still going on.
Well, yeah, but I mean, when it really hit the fan.
Yeah, when it popped, yeah, it was, I believe the end of February. It's just a few weeks ago. So
the stock went from, say, $15 a share up to $450 a share. So what happened? Let's start with what happened. Okay, so I'm going to have to do some defining of things for you is what I'm going to have to do. So let's start by talking about what short sellers are. So there are funds out there, or hedge funds. GameStop is a brick and mortar store. So let's say somebody looks at that and they say, "Okay, I don't like the fundamentals of GameStop. More and more people are going to online videos, games, and they're downloading their games. And I just don't think they're going to the stores to buy these games as much as they used to. We've been looking at the numbers, and we don't think that GameStop's going to do very good. We think that it's actually going to report bad numbers, and it's going downhill, and it's going to tank. So there are people that have that belief. So with that belief, what they do is they want to say, I think the stock is worth, say, $10. And they said, I think that stock over the course of the next 3 months is going to go from $10 to $3. So in essence, what they do is they go to someone like I would go to Nathan and I'd say, Nathan, you own 100 shares of GameStop. I would like to borrow your 100 shares of GameStop. And Nathan says, okay, I'll let you borrow them, but I'm going to charge you a little bit of money to borrow them. And you go, oh, that's great. Now I borrow your 100 shares of GameStop and I sell it for $10 a share. I made $1,000. Okay. Now in 3 months, I have to give Nathan back his shares of GameStop. My intention is that it's going to go from $10 to $3. So in 3 months, I'm going to buy it back for $3 and then I'll hand it back to Nathan. There's your 1,000 shares. I made $700. That's the theory behind what is called a short sale. So take that to the billionth degree. There were people that were shorting GameStop billions of dollars worth. They think that GameStop's going to go down. Now, there was a trading platform. So there are groups, and I can't remember the name of the group. What's the name of the group?
Wall Street Bets on Reddit.
Yeah, but on Reddit. Yeah, Reddit. So Reddit is a platform where all these people who are individual investors can talk and they can share ideas. And, oh, I think this is a good bet. But also part of public record is how many people have shorted that stock? How much money is actually in short? So there's a way you can go online. We can look, I can pull up a company and we can see how many options there are against it. We can look at how much and inside trading is going on. We can look at all kinds of things. It's all part of public record. So all these guys that don't belong to any type of financial firm, they're not financial advisors per se, right? They're not financial. They kind of get together. Well, what they did was some guy kind of came to the forefront and said, look, Wall Street Bets, is that what it was called?
Yeah, Wall Street Bets.
Yeah, Wall Street Bets. So there was a forum called Wall Street Bets. So it was a group of a whole bunch of investors and they're sharing ideas. And there were two people that were pushing inside of that group. There were two folks that were saying, hey, there's a whole bunch of money set up over here on the side where people think, these big hedge funds think that the markets are going to, or that this company is going to go down. But if we start buying the stock, now when more people want to buy it, what happens to the price?
Goes up.
Price goes up. But you've got $1 billion of shorts over here that on a certain date, they have to give back what they borrowed as far as the shares go. So what they're hoping for is the price to go down. Well, these guys said, hey, let's just start buying. Hey, let's push it. Hey, really, you should be buying GameStop. You should be adding GameStop. So it was all over the message boards. There was two people, I guess, that were pushing it pretty hard. And that, of course, they have their surnames, which was Roaring Kitty and Deep Effing Value was the other one. As it turned out, both of those people were one person. But we'll come back to that. So anyway, they started buying and buying and buying the stocks. Well, the date came, they drove that stock price all the way up into the hundreds of dollars. Well, the date came where all these hedge funds now have to buy it and the stock's trading way up high. So instead of it going by the value of the company, it became kind of a frenzy on they had to buy it back at a much higher price. Those hedge funds lost billions. And of course, the forums were all about, let's stick it to those rich folks in the hedge funds. Now, here was the kicker. The guy that was behind those two names, his name's Keith Gill. And he now has a whole bunch of lawsuits pending against him for securities fraud and market manipulation. As it turns out, Keith Gill didn't let anybody know that he also worked in institutional finance, which means he was working for a large fund. So he was basically, they made millions and millions of dollars. Well, now those hedge funds that lost, they're suing because they've tracked it back. So what did we learn from it? Well, we learned, number one, that social media can have a play in the stock market if you're organized well enough. They found out certain trading platforms couldn't handle the volume that once social media started talking about a stock, it didn't matter how good the company is or how bad it is. It was really a play against the shorts that were on Wall Street, which that's a gamble. If they're going to short a stock, they're gambling. They're just using fundamentals to say it's going to go down. You had somebody else that saw what they were doing and was able to manipulate people on social media to get them to drive the stock price up. So now you got normal everyday buyers that are doing it themselves, and they're going in and buying it for $400, $450. Then boom, it crashes down after all the Wall Street hedge plays are done. Now the average person's out money too. So what changes is that what does that have on the normal investor? I guess one of the big questions was, how does that affect my account? Well, if you were holding GameStop in your account, the value went way up. Odds are that if you are holding any, it's insignificant amount. But the big thing that it did show us is how the markets can continue to be manipulated. Used to, it was market manipulation wasn't nearly as easy as this, but we saw it a lot. We see it a lot with penny stocks. Same thing happens in penny stocks. People will get on chat channels and try to take it from 1 cent up to 8 cents, which doesn't sound like a lot, but if they have $1 million in it, their 1 million went to 8 million, then they sell out and everybody they talked into buying it is stuck. I think there's a movie about that too, The Wolf of Wall Street.
Something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah, that's it.
So what do you think will happen from this, Nathan? Now that this has happened and you've got people in the Senate and Congress talking about it, what do you think happens from this?
Well, this was obviously a shock to the system. This was news headlines for several weeks were all about GameStop. So anytime there's this type of attention, that's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for regulators to get their pens out and write new regulation, because this can never happen again. Ever.
Yeah, it becomes a political football, right?
Oh, yeah.
You know, if it's in the headlines, what do politicians want to talk about? Well, let's talk about what's in the headlines. Let's not talk about Social Security and how it's going to be bankrupt and how Medicare is running out of money. No. Let's talk about GameStop. And what I see happening is they'll use that as an excuse to imply regulations that have nothing to do with what happened.
Yeah.
But the bigger question is, how does it affect clients that we have retirement accounts and stuff with? How will it affect their accounts? I will argue for you that it won't have an effect on your accounts. It's such a small portion, and it's really kind of an isolated thing. But the same thing happened with BlackBerry, and it happened with another company. Those things are still pending, and there are lawsuits, and the lawsuits will drag on for years, but they'll end up being billions of dollars that'll change hands because of it, and there'll be new regulations enforced because of it too. Inside of a portfolio, what we look at is it's not what happened this day, what happened this week, what happened this month, because that's what a short-term investor is trying to do. That's what these market manipulators are trying to do. We're not a part of that. We're looking more at a long-term. So we're looking in 10, 20, 30-year phases. So those things don't concern me, because regulators will come in, FINRA, SEC, they're going to be looking for what was the manipulation that was done and how do we fix it. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. There will be more regulation. I mean, while this was still ongoing, you saw politicians from both sides looking at all sorts of angles, both from the Redditors who were, driving this price up, to the trading platforms who were restricting the trading while all of this was going on, restricting the buying and selling. So yeah, of course, there's going to be regulation. It's just, what will
Yeah, I
that?
didn't even start to go into that. You think of the one group, Robinhood, the trading platform.
Yeah, yeah,
They had to suspend trading because any trades they do, they have to have a backup of money to actually sort it. They had to go get an influx of like 1.2 billion or something to be able to open back up, to be able to handle that kind of trade volume.
yeah.
So it's just kind of interesting on how that worked. So our chatting with Chad and Nathan tonight. The purpose of this is really to answer a lot of questions. I got one more question. I will try to get that done. We're going to try to hold these to about 50 minutes, so less than an hour. And if you let us get going, I can speak for probably an hour and a half, 2 hours, as any and all of you know that have ever had a meeting with me. I can start to get sidetracked and go down a lot of different avenues. But a couple key points or takeaways. What action stocks are being in the market is actually your best hedge against inflation. Unemployment fraud, any type of fraud. If there's questions, if you're getting forms, start with us. If your clients of ours, bring it in. We'll help you walk through that to make sure that you're taken care of. And especially if we're doing your taxes too. So, and understand we can if we're not. GameStop, understanding how short sales work is really the key to that, and understanding we're not a part of that mix because we're long-term. And if we had all of your money in one stock, those are the kind of things that we think about or worry about, but we're not concerned with that. The last question that somebody had asked was, in 2021, what do we think the markets are going to do? We believe the markets are going to go up. Why? Because more people, I talked about this at the beginning, more people are going back to work. People are starting. A big portion of our GDP is actually consumer spending. So we see the economy doing better, and we see, also, I don't know, Biden got out his pencil today, didn't he? Just signed another, how much?
Well, yeah. So today at 9:30 a.m., $284 billion. Right. That 28. I don't know how many zeros go after.
It's a lot of zeros.
But at 9:30 this morning, $284 billion was transferred from the Fed to individual bank accounts in the form of those stimulus payments.
Total stimulus is about 1.9 trillion extra.
Right.
Yeah, and we're already at 28 trillion for a deficit.
Right.
If somebody asked me the question about taxes, please ask a question about taxes for the next one. Let me get on my soapbox and just go hog wild on that conversation. So we think that the markets are going to go up. Some of the areas that we think are a little bit beat up, we've moved some money into some higher yield type stuff. We've made some movements inside of our portfolios to account for that. So we've also made some moves inside of our equities to increase our equity holdings. So when we start to get into the real technicals, those are more what we do. And so people will often say, well, how do you do this? That's what we get paid the big bucks for, man, is to figure all this stuff out. No, actually, we're just moving more towards equity. We're moving more towards yield, and we're moving away from some of the things that have performed really well over the past year, which we're moving a little bit out of large cap. So those are some of the things we look at as we're moving into 2021, the end of 2021, and then the beginning of 2022. What happens after that? I don't know. We just try to keep track of it as we go. But in the long term, we know markets go up, and we try to be long-term focused on the long term for our investments and for our clients. All right, I've got 1 minute left, and I had one question left on the screen. What should I tell my grandchild who is getting ready for their first job? All right, so I'm going to share one thing with you. There's a great book on this. It's called Business Brilliant, where they talk about someone that comes out of college and they apply for a job. So most of the time, people go in and they apply for a job. And if they get offered the job, they're very grateful. to be offered the job and they don't do something that is super, super, super important when getting their first job. What is the first thing that you should do when you get a job? Nathan, do you know?
Ask for a raise.
Ask for a raise. Oh my God, what? They offered me a job. I'm not going to immediately ask for a raise. Tell your grandchild this. They are applying for a position. They are not in a bargaining position when they apply. However, a hiring manager, an HR person, goes through all of the candidates and they determine that this person is the perfect person for the job. They are the number one candidate. They did a survey of hiring managers and found that 90% of hiring managers were willing to pay more money for the position they hired if they would have just asked. That's an interesting fact. Now, they also said that they would not be offended by that. They actually thought that would be a good sign for someone to ask for a raise because it would show that they were confident in their abilities in that particular job. A hiring manager's job is to hire someone at the least amount of money they can pay for the company. That's what they want. They want to get the best person for the least amount. 90% said they had room in their budget where they could increase. And they did a survey and they did studies through Cambridge Institute, I think, or Cambridge College or whatever it was. And they said that on average, hiring managers were willing to pay an extra $3,000 per year. Now think about this. Wherever your grandchild starts in their career, if they start with a company and each year they get a slight pay raise, a cost of inflation or a pay raise, that pay raise starting at $3,000 more, that's $3,000 more, plus the pay raise inflation amount over the course of 30 or 40 years. Do the math on that. Here, let me do the math. We got a time for that. I'm going to do the math on this. 3,000, just an extra $3,000, just the 3,000, not even counting the step ups on that over the course of, call it 30 years at 10%. Over the course of a lifetime, right? $3,000 is my payment going in. I'm going to use 40. That's my in. I'm going to use 40 in. Let me do this. Future value. That's a difference of $1.32 million if they ask for a raise when they are offered the job. So if there's one thing you should tell your grandchild, among all others, it's when you are offered the job, ask for about a $4,000 more than what they offered you. And if you only get 1,000 more, you still got 1,000 more. Second thing you should tell them is start investing in something that you don't have to pay taxes on in the future. Roth accounts, look for Roth provisions inside the 401k. Last thing I would tell them is compare the benefit plans. If one company is doing a 10% match on a 401k and the other company doesn't at all, that's extra money on a $40,000 starting job. That's an extra $4,000 a year. Plus, adding that in over time when your pay goes up, that's another 1.3 million over the course of 40 years. So think about those things. And if you can get it in something that you don't have to pay taxes on in the future, brilliant, brilliant. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone. Hey, if you guys enjoyed it, let us know, send an email, tell somebody about it. We're going to try to do these at least monthly starting off. Submit questions. We're happy to talk on any topic, including green beer on St. Patrick's Day. So with that, everyone have a wonderful St. Patrick's Day.
Bye.
Perfect. We got to I got to thank you here. It said thank you, Chad and Nathan. Great.
Yeah,
I got another one here. Thanks for answering.
On there. Yeah.
Awesome.
And Debbie, Anonymous.
Yeah. Great. All right, man. I'll see you in the morning.
All right.
And see all you later. Happy St. Patrick's Day.